Great, thank you. I would like to call this meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the first meeting of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources for the 81st Legislative Session. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional and unceded lands of the Washoe people who have been its stewards for generations. And also remind all committee members to please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. With that, will the secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black. Assemblywoman Carlton.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Present.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chair Watts.
I am here, thank you. I'd also like to extend a welcome to the audience who is joining us to watch this meeting online, and let everyone know that we will be offering a public comment period at the end of the meeting. For today's agenda, we're going to do introductions for committee members, adoption of committee policies, and then we will have presentations from staff and a presentation from the Department of Wildlife. Before we start, I'd like to make a few housekeeping announcements. The Assembly Committee on Natural Resources is scheduled to meet at 4 p.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays. It is my intention to start meetings on time. So I ask that members and presenters log in early while we're meeting virtually to ensure that video and audio is working so that we can start the meeting right on time. Agenda items may be taken in a different order. 2 or more agenda items may be combined for consideration. Items may be removed from an agenda or the discussion of an item can be delayed. The virtual meeting format via Zoom that we are using currently is important to keep everyone safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, committee members, please just be sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking to minimize any background noise. While the legislative building has been closed, we have actually worked to expand the ability for anybody who's interested to participate in the process and in our meetings. Members of the public may provide testimony in different ways, all of which are going to be listed on each meeting agenda. You can provide public comment by registering at least 24 hours in advance to participate on Nellis, on the legislative website. To do that, committees, then Assembly Natural Resources, then meetings, and then click the participate button next to the meeting that you'd like to give testimony or comment in. You can also send written comments at any time to asmnr@asm.state.nv.us, and that is also listed on our committee's page on the legislative website. In addition, I'd like to note that any committee exhibits must be submitted electronically as a PDF to our committee manager, Devin, by no later than 4 o'clock the business day before our meeting. Anyone who wishes to receive copies of the committee's exhibits can find them on the legislature's website, and you can also sign up for additional committee information using the personalized legislative tracking service. As in the past, any person proposing an amendment to a bill must submit it in writing no later than 24 hours on the business day prior to the meeting. Any proposed amendments must include the bill number, a statement of intent, and your name and contact information. We ask that public comment be kept to 2 minutes so that everyone interested in speaking can be accommodated and to ensure that we get through our agendas in a timely manner. Speakers are urged to avoid repetition of comments made by previous speakers. It's completely fine to say, I agree with the statements made by someone previously, or even ditto. Lastly, a reminder to all those who testify pursuant to NRS 218E .085, it is unlawful for a person to knowingly misrepresent facts while testifying before a legislative committee. So now that we've gone through those housekeeping items, I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce members of the committee as well as the committee staff. We'll start with members, and if you could each just briefly introduce yourself, the district that you represent, your legislative service, and any interests that you particularly have for this committee. I'd like to start with our vice chair, Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Leslie Cohen. I represent Assembly District 29, which is the older part of Green Valley and Henderson into downtown Henderson and a sliver of Silverado Ranch in Clark County. This is my fourth session, and I've served every session in natural resources. I'm very excited to be back in natural resources. I described judiciary as my first legislative love, but I think this committee was my surprise legislative love. It's I grew up in Nevada, have been here since I was a baby, traveled all over Nevada, and I'm just thrilled to be back on the committee that really does the work throughout the state, protecting our wildlife, working with industries that have been in our state for, over 100 years, and just really, I think it's the heart of the legislature. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. We're glad to have you back. Next, could we have Assemblywoman Carlton introduce herself?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. I'm Assemblywoman Maggie Carlton. I represent Assembly District 14, which is on the east side of Las Vegas, the Sunrise Mountain area, right next door to Assemblywoman Martinez. I was thinking about natural resources today before the meeting, and I realized that for the first 5 years, first 5 sessions that I was on natural resources in the Senate, I was the only woman on that committee. So I definitely got an education from Senator Rose, Senator Jacobson, Senator McGinnis. So it was a very interesting time. And there were some very unique field trips involved also. So you'll read about those in my memoir. But thank you very much for having me back on the committee. I look forward to it. Public lands has always been one of my passions. And I was lucky enough to be the first woman Democrat to chair the Public Lands Committee when it switched, when Senator Rhodes retired. So very happy to be here, and thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Assemblywoman Carlton. Next, Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that you're willing to step up and take chair of this committee. I'm passionate, those of you who know me, passionate about rural issues. I'm from District 38, which is just over the mountains to the east of here, 2 mountain ranges over. I represent I'd say a pretty significant, actually a good swath of the typical demographics of Nevada. You might be surprised by that opinion, but we struggle in my district. I struggle with urban areas and very rural issues. I have towns like Fernley and Yarrington that need something very different than my ag communities of Smith Valley and Churchill County. So my passion has always been water issues, mining issues, and recreation. I love the outdoors as much as anybody, spend most of my time as much as I can outside. And I'm passionate about my hunting license and my fishing licenses, and I explore the outdoors. So I thank all of you who are willing to serve on this committee, because I think the very fact that you have agreed to be here, you love Nevada and all of Nevada. And so welcome to those of you who are new, and to those that are returning. Thank you for being back. I was chair of this committee in 2015, and it just was something that is important to me from a history nature. And thank you all for being here. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Titus. Next, let's have Assemblyman Ellison introduce himself.
Assemblyman Ellison, this is broadcast. Could you press the unmute button on Zoom? If you go to the lower left corner of the Zoom screen, there should be a little microphone that says mute or unmute.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure we want to unmute Assemblyman Ellison. I can run down the hall.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what, we'll come right back to you, Assemblyman Ellison, while you figure out how to get your line unmuted. Let's go to Assemblyman Wheeler real quick.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is will be my 5th term on natural resources. I've always loved it. My district, of course, is District 39, which is Douglas County, Story County, and a little sliver of northern Lyon County. A lot of ranching, and having been a bit of a rancher myself, very, very interested in our outdoors policies and our water policies, in our hunting, our fishing. So this has always been one of the best committees. And I've always asked for this committee because I really, really enjoy it. So I want to thank you for having me on here again.
Yes, thank you, and welcome back, Mr. Wheeler. All right, let's see if we can go to Assemblyman Ellison again.
Thank you, sir. I apologize that, but my computer keeps going off. I represent Assembly District 33, which is all the way from the Utah border, Idaho border, all the way down to Caliani. So if you take 3/4 of half the state, that's my district. I'm glad to be back on NetRAM. I've served on it ever since I've been here. This will be my last term. And I was on there all the way with Maggie. And I learned a lot about Las Vegas that I never thought of, like coyotes in the yards. And so stuff like this. So I learned a lot from everybody. I was born and raised in ranching all my life as a young kid. And I'm in construction now, and I miss the ranching, but we're highly involved with agriculture still. So I just saying thank you for having me, and welcome everybody. And I look forward to having a great session this year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Next, let's have Assemblywoman Hanson introduce herself.
Hello, Chair Watts and committee, and congratulations, Chair Watts, on your new committee assignment. This is my 2nd term in the legislature and my 2nd time to serve on natural resources, and I love this committee. I requested it as a freshman, and I requested it again, and glad to be here. I also have served on public lands during the interim. It was different than usual public lands in that it was, other than one meeting in person in Caliani, we normally take our meetings around the state. The rest were virtual. I have enjoyed being on natural resources. My district is District 32, and this is a good fit for my district. I live in Sparks, so I'm in Washoe County, and I go up to the border, the northern border, and all of Washoe County above Sparks, but then I have 6 other rural counties. So my district is a blend of urban and rural. I have Lander County, so I share a border with Assemblyman Ellison. I think if you vertically went down the state this way, we've got, those are our districts. So I have Lander County, Humboldt County, Pershing County, Mineral County, Esmeralda County. Again, I mentioned part of Washoe, and then a section of Nye County that includes Tonopah. I grew up for a time in Tonopah and Goldfield, and my family came to Nevada in the late 1800s for mining from the coal mines of Wales. I love living in the city, but I love my rural experiences as well. And I think this committee really represents Nevada, the old and the new, and the stewardship that we have to preserve those ranching, mining, hunting, fishing, trapping traditions, as well as embrace our urban areas as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's go on to Assemblywoman Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. From listening to everybody's conversation, I'm just so excited now that I was fortunate to get onto this committee. Sounds like everybody seems to love it. So already I'm excited and I love it too. Love the great outdoors. This is the first time on this committee. And I'm just really excited. I think there's a lot to learn. I love the great outdoors. I was fortunate, my parents came from Mexico City. So my grandma had a little ranch. So I was fortunate to do the big city life and then do the rancher's life, so I can kind of understand about the fishing and the gaming and all of the ranches and everything that comes along with that, and the respect that we have for those things. So I'm just very privileged and excited to be on this committee. So thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Welcome, Assemblywoman. Next, let's go to Assemblywoman Black.
I think you need to unmute Assemblywoman Black.
Is that working? Hello?
Yes, it is.
We can hear you now.
Something with that. Okay. Annie Black, Assembly District 19, Mesquite, Overton, part of Henderson, part of North Las Vegas. Grew up in Summerlin, but chose to live a little bit more in the rural lifestyle out of Mesquite. So my family are big hunters and fishers and, ranchers from Colorado, not from Nevada. I'm not necessarily familiar with mining, but I'm getting familiar with it. Water issues are kind of something that I grew up around. So I'm definitely not a subject matter expert, but I'm looking forward to becoming one. So thanks for having me, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And let's go to Assemblywoman Gonzalez now.
Thank you so much, Chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Cecilia Gonzalez, and I actually am neighbors with Assemblyman Watts. And so that's really awesome that our districts are very, very close to each other. I'm very, very excited to be on this committee. I am a Las Vegas native, and I've spent my whole childhood growing up camping in the outdoors, hiking, and just being very active. I'm very passionate about our public lands, protecting our wildlife. And although I don't have a professional background in this area, I'm very excited to learn and work with all of you.
Wonderful, thank you. And let's then go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Watts. I'm going to first start off with kind of echoing Assemblymember Martinez's comments that I'm really excited about this committee after listening to everybody else's excitement. I already was, because already excited to be on it, but now listening to everybody else, it just made me even more so. This is my first session, and I am representing the Assembly District 30, which is the heart of Sparks, as well as a little bit of the Reno area, so kind of the Truckee Meadows. And my experience with Nevada, Home Means Nevada is not only a song, it's kind of my way of life. I grew up either blessed or cursed, it depended upon the summer, as the daughter of a person that loved Nevada history. So I have been on more bus trails where buses were not supposed to be, and the bus would then break down, that I wish to recall. So I've had the opportunity to drive around the whole state and more than a few times, but I still love it, and look forward to our discussions today. Thank you so much. I'm truly honored.
Thank you. Now I will introduce myself again. Howard Watts. I have the honor of representing Assembly District 15 in the central east portion of Las Vegas. I am also very excited to chair this committee. It is my second session, and my second in this committee, and first as chair. And I am excited, as everyone learned from the introductions just now. We have a wealth of experience on this committee. And we have representation from really almost every corner of the state. And I'm excited to have that experience and those perspectives brought to the issues that this committee is going to face. I'm a proud native of Las Vegas, and I've had the privilege of being able to travel across this state and have come to love every single part of it, from the scenic environments to the communities, the recreation opportunities, as well as the local economies. Before entering the legislature, I had a background in advocacy, including working on environmental issues. And I've learned quite a bit more over the last term in the legislature serving on this committee. It was, like many others, one that I specifically asked to be assigned to. And it's my honor to lead us as we tackle important issues regarding our air, water, land, and wildlife. As we celebrate Black History Month, it's also an honor to serve as the first Black chair of this committee. And I look forward to working with you all and facilitating discussions about how we expand access to the outdoors, to recreation, and to jobs and other opportunities related to natural resources for all of Nevada's families. I'll just say, in terms of my approach as chair of this committee, I'm committed to running meetings in a manner that is professional, respectful, and fair to every member, as well as to the public and all those who come before us. We are open to all ideas, and honestly, I believe that is how we get the best outcomes in the legislative process. We have a lot of diverse opinions among the membership of this committee, and we will among those who come to present and speak to us. And I'm confident that through that process, we can craft stronger policies for the state. And it's my purpose to promote transparency and participation to the greatest extent possible, even with the adjustments that we are making for the health and safety of our members and our staff and their families. So with that, I'd like to briefly introduce committee staff. I'll begin with our committee secretary, Nancy Davis. This is Nancy's 6th session. She was committee secretary for Judiciary from 2011 to 2015. This is her 3rd session with Natural Resources. Nancy retired with 30 and a half years of state service, and she enjoys camping, hiking, and golfing during the interim. Devin Kajat is our committee manager. This is her 2nd session, having worked as a committee secretary for the Assembly in 2017. She resides in Henderson, Nevada, and works as a human resources technician for the Aging and Disability Services Division of the Department of Health and Human Services in Las Vegas. Trinity Tom is our committee assistant. She also staffs growth and infrastructure, as does Devin, our committee manager. And Trinity also staffs legislative operations and elections. This is her 4th legislative session and her 1st time on the Natural Resources Committee. She's an enrolled member of the Walker River Paiute tribe and enjoys traveling and playing softball in her free time. Ashley Fluellen is my personal attaché. This is her 1st session in the Nevada Legislature. She enjoys running, painting, and reading. And for those who are in the building, her paintings are up in the office. So I hope once people are able to come in that they check them out. She currently lives in Reno and become a professor of African American Studies. Jan Sinisbeck is our committee policy analyst with the research division of the Legislative Council Bureau. This is Jan's 4th session and his 2nd time staffing this committee. Returning members from last session will remember he staffed it in 2019. He is originally from Germany and enjoys the many outdoor opportunities that Nevada has to offer. Alan Amburn is our committee counsel with the legal division of LCB. This is his 3rd session and his 2nd time staffing this committee, also returning from 2019. He received his law degree from the University of Kentucky College of Law and is a member of the Nevada and Kentucky Bar Associations. He enjoys mountain climbing, skiing, and hiking. And Alex Drozdoff is our research policy assistant with the research division of LCB. This will be your 1st session. Alex has lived in Carson City for most of her life and enjoys running, snowboarding, and exploring northern Nevada. I want to thank all of the staff for all that you do to support this committee. We cannot be successful without you, and we are excited to have your experience and your passion for the outdoors and for our natural resources on this committee. So with that, let's get started. Our next agenda item and our main order of business today is the adoption of committee policies. These have been posted on the legislature's website. The committee will be taking action on this agenda item today, and we'll use a roll call vote to do so. And we will continue to use roll call votes for any items requiring a committee vote while we are meeting virtually. I ask that you, while we're on virtual participation, I ask that everyone follow the same standards of attire and conduct as you would if we were in a committee room, and that you keep your camera on as much as possible. This demonstrates to presenters and to me as chair that you're participating and are ready to take action on any matter that requires a vote. And I just want to do that also to make sure that the public knows that we're committed to listening to them. And if any issues come up, I'll follow up with members. As far as the committee policies, they are fairly standard and similar to those that have been approved in other committees. At this point, I think all of you have been on morning committees and potentially on your other committee as well. They serve to complement the assembly standing rules and the joint standing rules that we adopted on Monday on the assembly floor. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions on these committee policies.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the policies, and absolutely they do mirror many of what we have had in the past. My only concern is that the uniqueness of this particular session with our Zoom meetings, and as we saw signing in, I even was 5 minutes late just trying to find the right app to sign in, and I'm an old warrior at this by now. It still took a little bit. On number 9, on your policies, you say anyone wishing to participate in a meeting must sign into Nellis and register 24 hours prior to meeting in order to participate prior to the meeting. Because this meeting is a late afternoon meeting at 4 o'clock, maybe not being done until sometimes evening 6 or so, many of our public, we know that we want to have meaningful committee hearings where folks can participate. So by restricting participation to a meeting by having somebody sign in when we know it might be somewhat difficult for them to do, I just have concerns. Later on, as you are aware, we might post a bill that we might want to hear, we might change the agenda, and then just limit it to that 24-hour period with a late afternoon committee. I'm just worrying that folks won't be able to have a meaningful participation.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. You know, what I'll say is the main focus of that item is for those who will be presenting or testifying before the committee, so that we can make sure that we have them set up with all the information they need to join by video conference. For public comment or testimony via phone conference, you know, we can make sure that people have that information. I'll also say, for the sake of transparency, and as you're well aware, we are committed to getting whenever possible our agendas out 3 days in advance in alignment with open meeting law, so that people have adequate notice of the meetings and can sign up to participate. So again, this intention is to keep a uniform policy for anyone with to submit exhibits or to participate by video in our meetings, to sign up at least 24 hours in advance.
I'm just concerned that it's not clear on that language. It just says anyone wishing to participate in a meeting must sign in 24 hours prior to the meeting in order to participate. And there's no really clarity that it is in order to give public comment regarding a particular bill. They may not know about it again until that day, they want to call in and give testimony. So I guess it's just a definition of participation, and I can accept your clarification. So, you know, and at this point, if it's the understanding of these rules are those who are going to participate via either part of the presenting the bill itself, which absolutely I understand that would have been our request too. And if that's just a clarification, and I can accept that indeed, if somebody wants to call in and give a public comment, it doesn't have to be signing up 24 hours ahead, that this is strictly for somebody participating in a bill draft or a bill hearing, I'm sorry, then absolutely, then I can accept these rules with that understanding.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And yes, with that clarification that someone can sign up and receive the phone conference information for comment sooner than 24 hours in advance, that is correct. That is the intention.
Thank you, sir, for the clarification. With that, to accept these rules if there's no other comment?
We have a motion from Assemblywoman Titus. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Annie Black.
We have a second from Assemblywoman Black. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask the secretary to call the roll vote.
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes, with the clarification, number 9. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Yes. With that, the motion passes. Thank you, members. Thank you for the clarification. Clarifying questions. And as stated in my earlier remarks, I'm committed to making sure that meetings are as open and accessible to the public as possible. So with all the new protocols we've been put in place, we are still working things out. But my commitment is to work with all of you to ensure that that we can get notice out to the public in a timely manner and that we can facilitate participation in our committee meetings. So with that, we'll move on to a presentation of the committee brief, and I will turn it over to the committee policy analyst, Mr. Stinisbeck, to go over it. Mr. Stinisbeck, please proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, I'm Jan Stinisbeck with the Research Division of the LCB. And at the beginning, I want to point out that as nonpartisan legislative staff, I cannot advocate for or against any measure that comes before you. And with that, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the committee brief that is available now on Nellis. The committee brief is meant to be a general overview on what to expect from this committee during the session. And additionally, the brief includes links to resources with background information on important natural resources issues. On the first page of the brief, you can find a list of committee staff along with a list of pre-filed bills. We also added an overview of the bill statistics from last session. During 2019 legislative session, this committee processed 36 measures, from which 33 became law. I believe we can expect a similar workload for this session. And in the brief, you can also find a list of potential topics that might come before this committee. And at the end of the brief, you can find reports and publications, rather links to reports and publications that might be of interest to you. And as such, you can find links to the final reports of the interim study concerning wildfires in the interim committee on public lands, and other publications from the research division on important issues concerning natural resources. And important dates and deadlines for this committee are the April 9th, the first House committee passage, and May 14th, second House committee passage. The committee can expect to be busiest before these deadlines. And lastly, I want to note that as committee policy analyst, I'm available to assist the committee members with any research questions they might have or with amendments or other items before them. The research division provides nonpartisan technical assistance to the legislature on a confidential basis. And please do not hesitate to reach out to me with any questions that you might have. And again, thank you, Chair. At this point, I'm more than happy to answer questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for the overview, Mr. Stinisbeck. Again, this committee brief and overview is available on Nellis, both for members and the public to review. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Stinisbeck? All right. Hearing none, we will move on to our next agenda item. We have a presentation from the Department of Wildlife. So with that, I want to welcome Director Wasley back to the Committee on Natural Resources. Feel free to introduce yourself and begin your presentation whenever you're ready, sir.
Excellent. Thank you, Thank you, Chairman Watts, Vice Chair Cohen, committee members. For the record, Tony Wassley, Director, Department of Wildlife. Thank you all for your service. It sounds like we've got a tremendous amount of purpose and passion for Nevada's natural resources represented on this committee, and we are truly grateful and honored at the opportunity to give an agency presentation and overview so early in this session. So I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
I'm going to share it a different way because it doesn't appear to be advancing through the slides. So let me try it a little bit differently. Do you see the full screen or just a half of the screen?
We just see the half screen right now.
Okay. Chair Watts, if you would please, do you see 2 slides or 1 at present?
We see 1. Looks great right now.
Splendid. It's not advancing.
You want me to help you?
Bear with me, please.
Of course, no problem.
And then this is your screen too.
Yeah.
And then when you share it, oh man,
Yeah.
try that one.
We did a test run and it
Click on
worked. It's not advancing, so.
I'll make sure. You're in the PowerPoint, right?
Correct. We've got technical support on it. We did a trial run. It always works fine in the dress rehearsal.
This is
Yes, it does.
This is broadcast. Are you able, when you go to share screen, have you tried just sharing like screen 1 or screen 2 and having it open on that?
Yes, let me try this.
And if you could go to, yes, the full screen view, and we are seeing it advance. So
There we go.
there we go.
Fourth time's a charm. All right. Again, thank you, committee members, Chair Watts, Vice Chair Cohen, committee members. Thank you very much for this opportunity early in the session to provide an agency overview. Truly honored to be before you today. I'm going to start just a brief overview, the mission statement: to protect, conserve, manage, and restore. A lot of verbs, and that all pertains to Nevada's wildlife and its habitat for the aesthetic, scientific, educational, recreational, and economic benefits to citizens of Nevada and the United States, and to promote the safety of persons using vessels on the waters of Nevada. So the NRS chapters 501 through 506 contain the wildlife aspects of that, and then NRS chapter 488 contains the boating piece. When we look at Nevada's wildlife resources, we're talking about 895 unique, regularly occurring species. 456 of those are birds. So definitely the majority of Nevada's wildlife are birds. There's 173 species of fish, 163 species of mammals, 79 species of reptiles, and a couple dozen amphibian species. Within that 895, under the Federal Endangered Species Act, there are currently 21 of those species that are under listing review. There are 8 that are listed as threatened, 19 that are listed as endangered, and presently 0 candidates. We look at the agency and commission organizational chart. Essentially, there's two main bodies directly beneath the governor and the executive branch. One is the agency administered by the director's office, and the other is the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners. We look at the agency, the department structure. There's 7 divisions, and I'll highlight those briefly in a moment. But as we look at the agency, we see approximately 360 employees, which includes the 9 commissioners and approximately 50 or so seasonal staff and 30 contractors. That's 120 buildings, 34 radio sites, 11 wildlife management areas that comprise approximately 120,000 acres, 8 major facilities spread across the 7 unique divisions, 4 fish hatcheries, and the state is divided roughly into equal thirds in 3 jurisdictional regions. I'm going to start with a highlight overview of the Wildlife Commission. Per NRS 501171, the Wildlife Commission is comprised of 9 gubernatorial appointees with a 3-year term and 2-term limit, excuse me. One of those 9 members represents conservation. One of those members represents farming. One represents ranching. One represents the general public. And 5 members who during at least 3 of the 4 years immediately preceding their appointment held a resident license to fish or hunt or both in Nevada. The duties of the commission are contained in NRS, and under 501181 are highlighted as to establish broad policies for wildlife management and boating safety, provide broad policy guidance to NDOW, adopt regulations for wildlife management and boating safety, and adopt regulations specific to hunting, trapping, and fishing, for example, seasons, quotas, methods of take, etc. The commission considers NDOW recommendations, county advisory board input, and public views at an open meeting. The construct of that open meeting, that public process, is essentially this. The Department of Wildlife makes a professional recommendation based on the biology, the impacts, the consequences. The county advisory boards, and Nevada has a county advisory board structure. These are county commission appointed boards to represent the wildlife related interests of each county. Those county advisory boards provide a county perspective to the commission, and the general public provides their concerns and issues and perspectives to the commission. The commission takes all that input into consideration, generates policies and regulations that are then handed back to the department for implementation and enforcement. NDOW has a great deal of partners that we work closely with. We work with multiple conservation organizations. We work with the mining industry, the military, federal partners that include the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Natural Resource Conservation Service, among others, private landowners, tribes, other state agencies, primarily Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and the Nevada Department of Agriculture, and hundreds of volunteers. This photo on the top left represents a volunteer effort to collect native sagebrush seed to be used in post-fire revegetation. The lower left is a guzzler construction project, also using volunteer assistance. The volunteers are a critical part of the budget. I know that we've had a number of budget discussions in past sessions, and even with agency overview and to the money committee's pre-session, we talked a little bit about this. Essentially, approximately 95% of the agency's budget is derived from users. Some of that comes directly through the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. Some of it comes directly through boat registration and titling. And a portion of those non-federal funds are then used to garner federal aid. Those federal dollars are federal excise taxes that are collected from manufacturers of hunting, fishing equipment, and guns and ammo. States gain access to those federal excise taxes based on the number of licenses sold, fishing licenses and hunting licenses. Sales within a state are a key part of the formula to determine state apportionment. There's 3% of our budget that comes from other sources, not a significant amount, and 2% state general fund. Those general fund dollars primarily land in two areas. One is to the Wildlife Diversity Division and is used as a match to get federal dollars to manage a number of species. I think it's important to say that of that 895 commonly occurring species, there's roughly 8% of those 895 that people will pay to recreationally pursue through hunting licenses or fishing licenses. So we have a disproportionately large amount of our agency's budget that relies on a disproportionately small number of species. And so some of that 2% general fund is used as match to help meet the needs of some of those other species. I want to start looking quickly at the 7 divisions that make up the agency, starting with the director's office. The director's office has 28 positions, and they land in 5 key areas: the Wildlife Commission that we already spoke to briefly, the 17 county advisory boards, but then fiscal services and the centralized cost. This is the division that handles contracts, many of the fiscal operations of the agency and centralized costs. Human resources, the agency has 2 full-time and 1 part-time individuals in human resources to deal with the HR authorities that have been delegated to the agency. And then engineering and facilities, the agency has 3 full-time persons in our engineering and facilities. Our game management program, there's 35 positions in our game division, 6 primary areas of focus: wildlife survey and inventory. And prior to the establishment of seasons or quotas, the survey and inventory is a critical piece to derive what is allowable or sustainable yield or harvest. Once the survey and inventory is completed, the department can make a recommendation to the commission relative to season length, season timing, and also harvest quotas. The game division also handles landowner conflict resolution. So in some instances where we might have irrigated crops in a desert that might attract, for example, mule deer or pronghorn antelope and create a conflict situation, those conflicts, we have programs attempting to resolve those conflicts that are housed in the game division. We also have a full-time wildlife veterinarian and vet tech for a wildlife health monitoring program. That expertise is also used by some of the other divisions. It's also used in fisheries and used in diversity. They do everything from bighorn sheep monitoring and disease testing to surgical spaying and neutering of desert tortoises to surgical implant transmitters and Gila monsters. So incredibly broad and diverse responsibilities of that wildlife veterinarian. Research collaboration. Oftentimes we have research needs, questions that need to be answered, and we do not simply either have the expertise or the capacity. So we work with universities both in Nevada as well as outside Nevada, depending on where that expertise lies, and have a number of projects ongoing throughout the country. Air operations, this is a key part of our survey and inventory program. Our air operations consist of 2 Bell 407 HP helicopters. Those helicopters are also used outside the game division. We use those helicopters to do things like sling materials in to construct artificial water developments. We use those aircraft to actually take water to those water developments. And so we're broadening as we've increased our capacity in our air operations, the capability of those ships. We've broadened their application and saved the agency some significant expense in contracting those services. In the Fisheries Management Division, 46 positions, 5 key areas: sport fish production, as the name suggests. This is about producing fish in a hatchery environment to meet the expressed demand from anglers. As the picture in the upper right shows, one of our staff in the fisheries program stocking a water. So we have the 4 hatcheries around the state producing sport fish. We also have the fisheries management in our fisheries division. That fisheries management is different from the sport fish production, but it is management of populations, species, age class, just determining the health of that fishery. Native aquatics, we have a number of native species that have unique needs or conservation needs that are met through the Native Aquatics Program. General aquatic health monitoring, aquatic ecosystems, things, water quality, parameters, just looking at species presence, absence, water temperature, water quality. And then the Aquatic Invasive Species Program, which is a relatively new program that is largely funded by the issuance of the Aquatic Invasive Species stamp or sticker that's required for boats. Majority of the AIS, Aquatic Invasive Species efforts, are spent in southern Nevada and largely in association with Lake Mead in attempts to keep the quagga mussels contained within that water. Wildlife Diversity Division, one of the smaller divisions, 13 positions. Primary responsibilities include the State Wildlife Action Plan. This is a wildlife action plan that is a federally approved plan that is required in order to be eligible for some federal funds. It's revised on a 10-year schedule. We're currently revising our State Wildlife Action Plan as we speak. We were one of the first to have our plan approved, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service used it as a template for a number of other states. Our State Wildlife Action Plan identifies 256 species of conservation need and 22 different habitat types. Those species identified include both game and non-game species. For example, you'll find mule deer, bighorn sheep, sage grouse, and Lahontan cutthroat trout present in that action plan. Non-game species management, I mentioned earlier that roughly 8% of the species, of that 895 species that people are willing to pay to purchase a license or a tag to pursue, that leaves 92%. And those 92% often are identified as non-game species. And so this Wildlife Diversity Division takes care of the majority of those non-game species, excluding some of the aquatic species that fall to the Fisheries Division. Also, the threatened and endangered species, those species that are listed as threatened or endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act, fall to the Wildlife Diversity Division for monitoring and recovery planning efforts in many instances. Also, relevancy, a topic that has been addressed significantly through state wildlife agencies and trying to engage broader and more diverse audiences into what has traditionally been a very narrow audience and constituent base. And then Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which is federal legislation to provide dependable funding for the conservation of these other 92% of the species. We also have a biologist assigned to the Tahoe Environmental Improvement Program, working with DCNR, that's housed in our Wildlife Diversity Division. So when we look at the fish and wildlife resources of the state, the Game Division is responsible for management, protection, research, and monitoring of wildlife classified as game mammals, upland and migratory birds, and fur-bearing mammals. The Fisheries Division works to ensure health and viability of Nevada's fish and amphibians in all streams, rivers, lakes, reservoirs, springs as well. And then the Wildlife Diversity Division is responsible for all non-game wildlife in the state, with the exception of some of the aquatic species that are handled by the Fisheries Division. Law Enforcement Division, 53 positions. Our Law Enforcement Division is our single largest division in the Department of Wildlife, representing nearly 20% of our workforce. 6 key areas: wildlife enforcement, and as the name suggests, this is about enforcement of wildlife laws. Boating enforcement. Our Law Enforcement Division is essentially the highway patrol of the state's waters. General public safety, gun safety, safe operation of water vessels. They also administer the boating education program. This legislative body passed legislation a few sessions back requiring operators of vessels of a certain age to take a boating education, much like a driver's education test and course, and that's administered through our Law Enforcement Division. And then dispatch services for officer safety and dispatch. That's handled through the 34 mountaintop repeaters that were previously referenced. And radio technology, which is the maintenance and upkeep and upgrades on those mountaintop repeaters. So the Boating and Law Enforcement Division, the Law Enforcement Division is responsible for protecting wildlife resources and ensuring the safety of the public. And the Department of Wildlife is responsible for the safety of citizens on all of Nevada's waterways. The Habitat Division, 39 positions, 6 key areas: development, project review. And what this essentially is the National Environmental Policy Act requires any project on federally administered lands or using federal dollars to undergo an environmental review process. The State Wildlife Agency is a key partner in that review process, and we are obligated and we take that responsibility very seriously to provide potential impacts to the wildlife resources of Nevada. The Habitat Division also houses the Mining Industrial Pond Permit Program, the Habitat Conservation and Restoration Program, Nevada Partners Program, which is, as the name suggests, about partnership and trying to leverage funds through that partnership, the Water Development Program, and the picture on the lower left with helicopter with the bucket dropping water, that's just recharging a water development. That large flat surface intercepts rainfall that runs downhill, and you can see pipes coming from that, and that'll be piped down into a drinker that is then accessed by multiple types of wildlife, including birds, reptiles, mammals. In this particular instance, this was constructed for bighorn sheep. Habitat Division also contains our wildlife management area program, as previously stated. That's 11 different wildlife management areas comprising approximately 120,000 acres across the state. Habitat and Recreation. The Habitat Division is responsible for ensuring that all wildlife habitats are in productive and good ecological condition. Although we don't maintain jurisdictional authorities for those federal lands, it certainly falls upon us to call out conditions that aren't good and presenting challenges to any of the state's wildlife. Habitat Division administers that water development program, rangeland and wildfire rehabilitation efforts, planning, operating, and maintaining the wildlife management areas, and then reviewing, assessing, and providing comments on all proposed land and water uses that involve federal lands or federal funds. The Data and Technology Services Division, just over 32 positions, 6 key areas: licensing, so all hunting, fishing, trapping licenses administered through the Data and Technology Services Division. They also administer the hunt application and draw process. So all big game tags in Nevada are on a lottery type system. Hunters apply and then draw, and all that is administered through the Data and Technology Services Division. Customer support is also one of the primary functions of DATS. And then the Geographic Information System. So much of the data and the mapping products are housed in the Data and Technology Services. Boat registration. So I've previously mentioned that our Boat wardens are essentially the highway patrol on the waters. We also provide services analogous to the Department of Motor Vehicles when it comes to titling and registering watercraft. And then information technology as well. The Department of Wildlife has 3 IT positions to meet the IT needs of our agency statewide. One of the things that has fallen to the Data and Technology Services Division to implement was the license simplification and the new vendor selection implementation effort. So in the 2017 legislative session, the department's license simplification bill was approved. And I just wanted to point out that in the first 3 years with a new vendor, Calcomai, the department has seen unprecedented growth, an increase of over 33% in applications submitted for big game tags, an increase of 77% in fishing licenses as represented by this orange line, and then an increase of 54% in hunting license sales, increase represented by this blue line. And certainly this past year in COVID, with people turning to nature at unprecedented rates, that may have had effect on the steepness of this line in the last year for both hunting licenses as well as fishing licenses. But you see 2 years prior, there's also significant growth. And what switching to this new system and new vendor has done is it put us, we were poised to be able to take advantage of the modernized and simplified system, to take advantage of this interest to get outside to fish or hunt or register vessels. This increase of over 33% in big game tag applications results, in a great deal of interest in that big game draw process. And that draw process is streamed live on YouTube with real-time questions and answers for the thousands of viewers that watch that. Conservation Education Division, as the name suggests, this is about education of conservation, conservation-related education. We've got 24 positions. They're responsible for the hunter safety training, hunter education. Anyone who desires to purchase a hunting license born after, I believe it's 1960, is required to complete the hunter safety training course. They also provide hunter and angler education, which explores different means and methods, fly tying and fly casting as an example. And then general wildlife education, as well as media and public relations. Our PIOs, the public information officers, are housed in our conservation education division. And then relatively new areas of urban wildlife. I say it's new, not in terms of having challenges or issues, but it is new because we received some funding from this body in past sessions to where we were able to bring some capacity to that. And I want to speak to this just quickly. In 2020, our agency received just shy of 4,000 urban wildlife calls. Most were regarding baby birds or aggressive wildlife. We spent an estimated 7,128 hours and traveled almost 26,000 miles resolving urban wildlife issues during 2020. We're trying to give callers the tools to reduce conflict through education. The goal of the program is to educate communities on living with wildlife through one-on-one interactions during these urban wildlife calls, and then proactive outreach and education aimed at preventing conflicts with wildlife and empowering community members with the tools necessary to achieve solutions. And so a number of presentations to HOAs, a lot of community level engagement. One of the products I'd like to share with you quickly on the left side of the screen, Coyote Calls heat map. This is the southern region, and we can see, Boulder City is kind of a hot spot, but we also see around Henderson and the Paradise area, those areas represent the highest density of calls, coyote calls. And then on the right side of the screen is a map for the western region. And so Sparks, this area just south of Sun Valley and northwest Sparks has got the highest density of calls, but also up in Lemon Valley, and then just west of the Reno Airport and Somerset, we see where these areas are, and then we can tailor our outreach efforts to homeowners or HOAs in those areas. We are here to serve you. This really represents our customer service and customer first attitude that we've emphasized certainly in the past couple years as we've transitioned to a new vendor and developed some new programs. The Conservation Education Division works to promote the department programs and services and recreational opportunities while also educating citizens about state wildlife and boating rules, excuse me, and developing educational programs. Wildlife education and webinar programs reached thousands of citizens during 2020. The Data and Technology Services Division is responsible for the customer service interface, license and tag sales, and vessel titling and registration. A call center is staffed 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, with NDOW staff being the primary contact from 8 to 5 on business days. Last FYI, NDOW has a new home in the southern region, 3373 Pepper Lane in Vegas. This is on Pecos between Russell and Sunset. For those of you familiar with that area, we went from several disjointed and disjunct offices scattered in a number of areas to a single home that was it was an existing building that was previously occupied by Homeland Security. These pictures on the left with the green counter show the old office customer counter space, and immediately below that shows the new customer counter interface. The power of nature during a pandemic. Sporting goods stores have virtually sold out of many recreational goods such as fishing rods, freeze-dried meals, camping supplies, wildlife watching supplies, as well as guns and ammunition. Recreational opportunities not only provide economic benefits, but also physical and mental health benefits. Since the pandemic, the public has been appreciating the benefits of nature and calling on public representatives for financial support. A survey by Pew Research Center showed that 50% of adults regularly spent time outdoors to help cope with the pandemic. National Geographic reported that citizen scientists are providing beneficial data on wildlife viewing. During 2020, NDOW's virtual programs reached over 18,000 people. Fishing license sales in 2020 alone increased by over 24%, and hunting license sales increased by nearly 12%. I want to thank you all for your time and your dedication, and I look forward to working with you through this session. I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to speak to wildlife bills as they come before the committee. So again, Chairman, committee members, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Wasley, for that informative presentation. We know that your department handles a wide range of issues relating to wildlife, as well as to lands with your habitat work and wildlife management areas. So we're glad to have you here. Having been a county advisory board member in the past, I got to learn about many of the department's activities, and I'm glad that you were able to join us and share some of that knowledge with all of us. Also, just to talk about how outstanding the new Southern Nevada office is, I hope when people are able to visit. And for those who did visit the old office for the department, the pictures don't do justice, the change in space, even just in the lobby area. So thank you. Thank you again, Director, and we'll open it up for questions, and we will start with Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Wasley, for being here in the Zoom world and for the presentation. Just two really quick ones I think you can answer quite quickly. On one of the very first slides when you were showing the budget and that great big pie graph with the majority of it, 98% of it being the funding coming from the private, the private sector per se, the use of for fishing, hunting licenses, boating, the different user fees, which is very impressive. When you broke down the other budgets in the other segments, when you were talking about the different divisions, are all those budgets included? Is that the graph includes all those budgets?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Hanson. That's the entire agency budget represented as a percentage that are essentially user derived. I think the takeaway, we could dive into that 95% of user derived, and you could cut that roughly in half to determine which portion is derived directly from license sales, tag sales, versus the other approximately half that comes from the federal government as it's administered through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's the collection of federal excise tax on guns and ammo, and the collection of federal excise tax on fishing equipment. And the guns and ammo constitutes the Pittman-Robertson contribution, and the fishing equipment is the Dingell-Johnson Act. And those are apportioned to states based on the number of certified license holders, as well as population and land area.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. And then the second question, I'm familiar with where some of the fish hatcheries are, but to complete my education and for the edification of the rest of the members, where you mentioned there's 4 fish hatcheries in the state, and I know there's the one at Pyramid Lake, the Pyramid Paiute tribe has a fish hatchery. I'm assuming you don't count that as one of in the number. So how many, where are the ones that you mentioned, the 4?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblywoman Hanson. We do not count the Pyramid Lake hatchery or the Fish and Wildlife Service facility either. The 4 that I reference include Gallagher, which is in Ruby Valley, the Gallagher hatchery, Spring Creek Rearing Station, which is about 4 miles south of Baker, Nevada, on the eastern side of the state, the Mason Valley hatchery in Mason Valley, just north of Yarrington, and then the Lake Mead hatchery on Lake Mead proper.
Thank you so much, Chair, for the indulgence. And just a plug, maybe in the spring we could have a field trip. If things open up, I highly recommend a visit for members whenever they can do it, to go out to the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe Fish Hatchery. It's an unbelievable experience in the spring.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Hanson. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through Chair Watts to Director Bosley, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I do have a quick question that kind of combines 2 different slides. One is from slide 14, when you were talking about the Tahoe Environmental Improvement District or area. And then the other one has more to do with COVID-19. Did you see an increase of activity when it came to the Tahoe Environmental Improvement employees' work when it comes from that invasive species act? You know how we had to have all the boat inspections, both in Tahoe and then also possibly in the other lakes? Or is that more in California? So I'm a little bit confused as to whether or not that's Nevada or California when those boat inspections take place.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Anderson. So let me answer the Tahoe Improvement Program question first. So the Tahoe Improvement Program is a program that is housed and administered within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Part of that program is a shared position with the Department of Wildlife. So we have a biologist who drives our truck, wears our uniform, and has our agency's name on his paycheck, who is housed, works part-time in their building with them in coordination and providing that wildlife perspective and input to that broader program that's administered under Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And that individual that works for us spends a great deal of time doing surveys. He has no engagement or involvement with the invasive species program. He surveys wildlife, everything from snowshoe hares to raptors, woodpeckers, monitoring the species that occur within that basin. As far as the invasive species go, the Tahoe is as I'm sure many of you know, is kind of an entity to and of itself, and is the Aquatic Invasive Species Program up there is also administered unique to Tahoe. They have their own program in terms of inspections, and we have the same requirements that they have the AIS sticker that are typically obtained when they're registering their boats. We provide that, but we as the Department of Wildlife do not man those inspection stations. However, every other water in the state, with the exception of those waters that are, on tribal lands, we do provide inspection and, where we can get to it. So the AIS program in Lake Tahoe is separate and unique from the AIS program elsewhere in the state as administered by the Department of Wildlife.
May I ask a follow-up question, Chair Watt? So thank you for that clarification. So I'm so sorry to have made you go through that because I did not know it, obviously. Did we see, though, an increase of activities? Because you noticed it was mentioned at the end, how many more, gun sales, how many more camping sales, et cetera. Was there an increase of boat activities in the other areas? And I just did not take note of that.
Yes, again, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Anderson. And we have noted a huge uptick in activity everywhere, not just on the waters, but certainly in the mountains, in the valleys, everywhere. And we hear almost daily, I went to my favorite spot where I'm normally alone and there were people everywhere. And that was one of the challenges for enforcement, actually, quite frankly, as people sought solace in nature and headed out. I'm sure that the state parks could share some tales about the line at the boat ramp at a number of their facilities and how challenging that was to manage the traffic and that demand to get out and recreate. But we've seen it in all aspects and facets of outdoor recreation. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. I have a comment and a question. I'll go with my question first. With our significant loss of the habitat and the actual animals themselves, I'm speaking with the sage hen and the potential for them to go on the endangered species list and all the mitigation we have done for the sage hen. I'm wondering if we have any kind of a breeding program for them or reintroduction. We know that the chukar were actually introduced and not native to the state of Nevada, and that was very successful as well as the Hungarian partridge. I'm just wondering, has there been an attempt to reintroduce sage hen?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Titus. Yes, there have been attempts, and I was briefed on one as recently as yesterday. It isn't necessarily a captive breeding program, and the Wyoming State Legislature approved a captive breeding type program a couple sessions ago. You may be familiar with that, and they have struggled to implement anything meaningful or effective there. That is, I think, been a failure at best. Where we can and do have some success is when we find a genetic bottleneck. And that's what I was briefed on yesterday in the bi-state sage grouse population, is that we had one particular population management unit that showed very low hatch rates. I think the hatch rate was 31%, and the strategy to improve that and the underlying cause was speculated to be low genetic diversity. The way that they have tried to address that is by translocation of birds. There's also been translocation efforts in the state of Washington. Birds from Nevada, they've tried to translocate into Washington, and then some translocation efforts into the Dakotas from Wyoming. Ultimately, what the challenge is, for sage grouse, one of the biggest challenges, as you mentioned, is habitat. And if the habitat isn't there, the birds don't survive. They have incredible breeding rituals where they have this site fidelity. They tie to the area where they dance and strut and find their mates. And a lot of that breeding ritualization is lost through some of those translocation efforts and activities. And so there's a lot of research ongoing right now, and some of it shows some promise. It certainly has to be habitat there, and certainly needs to take into consideration the genetic diversity in that population to know if it can be successful.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. Is the department continuing to offer a hunting tag on, or a hunting season on the sage hen? And if so, can you tell me what the philosophy is behind that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. The department is still allowing some harvest of sage grouse in areas where the population metrics suggest that it can be sustained. Those harvest levels of the population, roughly 3% of the population in those, up to 3% of the population in those areas may be harvested. One of the values of the harvest, well, one of the primary values is that through harvested birds, and this is might be a little mind-blowing, but you can take a wing from a female bird and you can determine if that hen was successful in hatching a nest, and nesting and hatching. And because of the metabolic costs associated with reproduction of these birds, it affects the rate at which they molt, their feather loss and replacement. And so we get tremendous value from the wings that are collected from a harvest level that is considered by all intents to not be additive to the harvest that occurs through predation or habitat loss or other things. So this is a very sustainable level of harvest. It's not based solely for recreation purposes, but scientific purposes, because if we have a habitat treatment in an area and we need to assess the impacts on the population, if we have wing data and we know that the birds in treatment area A had higher nest success than birds in treatment area B, then that provides data to feedback to where we can adaptively manage.
So has there been any thought where these areas, and I understand that, and I already knew what you were going to say, but I think a lot of members, we get that question all the time. Well, why are we continuing to have a season on this animal that's almost on the endangered species list? So what are you doing in Nevada by still shooting them? So I appreciate your response. I think it's good for folks to hear that. Also, in those areas where you do allow a season, has there been any thought to maybe, as you said, translocate or move those particular birds that we know are doing well, as opposed to having a season on them, maybe move them to another location?
Thank you for the question. I think the limiting factor for sage grouse is that they are sagebrush obligates. They do not have a muscularized gizzard where they can break up seeds. They are obligated to eat sagebrush, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for their lives. Their chicks can need insects and forbs when they're growing, but sage grouse are sagebrush obligates. And so translocations are great if the habitat exists. But when we look at the trends, we have lost over 25% of our priority habitat sagebrush habitats to fire in the last 10 years. And so those kinds of losses can't be overcome by translocation efforts. And that's where that helicopter and the drill seeding and those volunteer efforts to collect bags and bags of sagebrush seed and getting those back on the ground will pay dividends.
All right, thank you for all that. And just two comments. One is the article on the Pew Trust Foundation about hunting and is so important. And I do have a copy of that, and I sent that to the chair, and he can send it out if folks are interested in seeing a copy about how important hunting was and how it has expanded with this pandemic and getting out of doors. And it's just been an impact, not just in Nevada, but nationwide. And the final comment I might have is, Director Wassley, would you maybe comment on the Pell pin that our chair is wearing to the left there? Because that's a very notable pin that he has on, and there is indeed significance to that, historical significance to that pin.
There certainly is, and I took note of that early, Assemblywoman Titus, so thank you for bringing that up. I didn't want to be conspicuous in mentioning it, but Chair Watts is wearing one of the most recent arrivals and additions to the Nevada ungulate cohort, and it's a moose. And we have seen an increase in the moose population in Nevada. Moose have been moving down, presumably from Idaho, And presently, we have a couple moose collared and are learning a great deal about their habitat preferences and movement patterns. So kudos to you, Chair Watts. I took note of that early and like it.
Thank you, sir, for allowing me all the questions, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And yes, I thought it was very appropriate given both having the Department of Wildlife present today, as well as in recognition of the former chair of this committee, Assemblywoman Swank, who gifted these to committee members last session. So with that, I think we have a question from Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, I have a couple questions. Thank you for the presentation, Director. I also wanted to know about the moose. Only I want to know about the squirrel and if the squirrel is still hanging around them.
They are inseparable.
Good to know.
Except for brief moments when the squirrel climbs a very high tower and dives into a bucket of water.
Good to know. Thank you. And then I also wanted to know about, I don't think when you were discussing the increases to outdoor recreation, if you hit on this, but so forgive me if you did, but can you discuss the numbers coming from out of state versus local in-state people who seem to be now taking advantage of our outdoor recreation?
That's a great question, Vice Chair Cohen, and I don't know that off the cuff that we have an easy way to measure that. We can certainly look at non-resident interest in hunting opportunities, and there's a huge uptick there, but that was so early in the pandemic. That was, that big game application period starts in mid-March and goes to early May, mid-May. And so it was early in the pandemic, so it's difficult to know how much of that might be attributable specifically to the pandemic, but we are seeing a significant uptick in non-resident outdoor recreation, but I don't know that we have a good metric to measure that aside from that, which was early in the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a couple of very brief questions, hopefully. Following up on Assemblywoman Cohen's, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the increase in sportsman interest and how the department's education or other activities are looking to help retain some of those sportsmen. As you know, angling has had pretty good interest, but the participation rate of people in hunting has generally been in decline. And this seems like an opportunity that may help recover some of that participation and enthusiasm. So I was just wondering if there's anything that you could speak to on that.
Thank you, Chair Watts. There's been a number of efforts around the country to address what has been a declining trend in hunters, and it spawned a movement known as R3 in the industry, which is retention, recruitment, and reactivation. Nevada had slow increases in hunting participation up until about 3 years ago, but even that slow increase was being outpaced by the state's population growth. So the per capita was still a negative. We were still losing per capita. There wasn't one single thing that the department did to try to encourage it, but it was a suite of things, some of which were addressed in the presentation, the customer service piece. There's also, a lot of outreach, transitioning to that new system gave us current contact information. We were able to segment our users and have outreach specific to age, geography, gender, types of uses and interests. And so we have, rather than, the historic approach was blanket email and send it all, or worse yet, snail mail, put a letter in an envelope and have huge mailing costs and send it out to 70,000 people. Now we can be much more strategic in our outreach and our engagement. We are much more customer service oriented. You saw the statistics on the call center. We also simplified that license going to a 365 license. And what we saw was with our fishing licenses, we saw people towards the end of the year, which was the end of the old license year, buy one-day licenses. When we switched to 365 days from the date of purchase, all those one-day licenses became annual licenses. We also allow people to sign up for auto renewal. So you don't have to go to the store or get back online. You just check a box and that license is automatically renewed. So one of the interesting things when industry looks at participation, they look at what's called the churn rate. And that churn rate is essentially the number of people that drop out of those activities year in and year out. And if you look at fishing license holders, only 1 in 10 fishermen or fisherwomen have a license each year over that 10-year period, only 1 in 10. So one way to address that churn rate and try to encourage people to get in the field is have that auto renewal. And then with that auto renewal, if somebody says, well, I paid for it, I want to use it, then that's encouraging them to get out there. So that's a small smattering of some of the strategies that we've employed, strategic engagement, outreach, user, customer friendliness, customer service, user-friendly interface, modernized, simplified, the number of licenses and stamps that was a barrier to participation, trying to have those go away, less confusion. And we're still continuing as we're going through all our regulations and trying to simplify our NACs where they've been cumbersome for interpretation and confusing for our users.
Thank you very much for that. And having used both the old system and the newer system, I can speak to some of the improvements that have come from the modernization and simplification efforts. So thank you for that. One other quick question I had was if you could speak at all, and again, just some brief top level points about how you've seen climate impact your agency and how you're working to adapt to it. Of course, the state has been working on the development of a climate strategy, and I know that it touches everything, including our habitat and wildlife. So I was just wondering if you could share a couple of thoughts with the committee on that.
Oh, thank you very much for the question, Chair Watts. I'll just 3 things that come to mind immediately. One is the fire, the cheatgrass fire cycle, and what we're seeing in these wildfires, the size, the impacts, the magnitude, and the invasive species that come in behind them. Secondly is how that warming and decrease in precipitation affects the habitat that the mule deer and sage grouse depend upon. And you need to look no further than pronghorn and elk to see the beneficiaries of some of these habitat type changes. Pronghorn and elk are grazers. They rely more on grass. Sage grouse, as the name suggests, and mule deer are much more reliant on the thermal cover and forage provided by sagebrush. So as the climate changes and the quality of those forage and their abundance of that habitat type are diminished, and those species are impacted. And then lastly, just water availability, water quality, water temperature, and affecting fisheries and those other species that are dependent on it, whether it's streams, seeps, bogs, reservoirs, algae, the harmful algae blooms, and so some of the water quality parameters as well.
Wonderful. Thank you again for all of that information. Does anyone else have a question for the director? All right, hearing none, thank you again, Director Wasley, for the presentation and for all the work that you're doing. The return of moose, among many other things, I think speaks to the success of the work that your agency is doing. So with that, we are now going to take a very short break to allow people to call in for public comment, which is our last item on the agenda today. As a reminder, to provide public comment, you must go to the legislative website and sign up. Registrants will receive a phone number, meeting ID, and instructions to join the meeting. So we're going to, it is 5:40 right now. We'll wait until 5:43 for anyone who is listening to dial into the public comment line. And in the meantime, the committee members can be at ease. All right, I have 5:43 broadcast. Do we have any in the public comment queue?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. So that concludes our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be Monday, February 8th at 4:00 p.m. I also want to note to all committee members, we had initially joint meeting tomorrow with the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. That joint meeting is canceled. So Growth and Infrastructure members will still be getting that overview. And if anyone is available, I encourage them to tune into that. But we will not be having a natural resources joint meeting with them. So our next meeting will be on Monday, the 8th. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.